Hi, thanks for coming, and thanks to Luke for coming as well. We're really excited about this presentation tonight. The Water Committee has a new position statement on waters for rivers. So this was just the perfect thing to. We just want to support people who support water for rivers. So I would like to introduce Luke Cole from the Sonoran Institute, and he's going to talk about a sustainable future for people, wildlife, and water on the Santa Cruz River.
So Sonoran Institute, we are a conservation nonprofit. We're based here in Tucson, and next year will be our 35th year in operation. We do water conservation, sort of river and ecosystem restoration work throughout the entirety of the Colorado River Basin. And I luck out because we're based here. I get to do my work here in directing our Santa Cruz River program. We're a pretty small outfit. We have about 45 to 50 staff, 35 of whom are in Mexico at our program that is working to connect the Colorado River to the Gulf of California. We have our Santa Cruz River program that I'll be talking about a portion of that tonight. And then we have another great program called Growing Water Smart that works with communities and municipalities to help them collectively, and when I say them, I mean like the mayor, the water engineer, the economic development team, the lawyers, break down those municipal silos and get everybody around the table to understand what's your current water situation. And everybody in the Colorado River Basin is struggling with their water right now. So just understanding where you're at is really important, then helping them envision where they want to be at some determined point in the future, give them the messaging tools to get there, and then everybody comes away from it with $10,000 at least startup grant fund where they can take an aspect of what they learned in the workshop and apply it at home. So the city of Tucson has participated in this, Pima County has participated in this, municipalities all around the state of Arizona. There's one happening right now in Colorado. We just had our first one in California recently, and we did one for the US-Mexico border in Ambos Nogales, so right up the river from where we are here. So it's a really great program. All of these programs functioning in unison work to connect people and communities to the natural resources that nourish and sustain them. That's our mission. So what I want to talk about now is our work on the urban wildlife refuge.
So let's talk about what is important in this race. It is important that we turn the page on this same old tired rhetoric.
Beryl, could you please mute yourself?
The needs of the American people.
Right. I'm gonna get everything down out of the way. So the work I'm going to be presenting today is not a Sonoran Institute alone project. This Santa Cruz River Urban National Wildlife Refuge has become a community-wide regional project where entities working together from neighborhood groups and individuals to elected officials to organizations, universities are all putting the effort in together to work with the federal government to establish permanent federal protection for the Santa Cruz River. It's a really, really exciting project. So over there, yes, and hit okay. Sorry, a couple housekeeping things on the screen. Great. Okay, so let's just put ourselves in our place. I know some folks calling in from out of state as well. They may be familiar with the area, but the Santa Cruz River, this is a fascinating, fascinating river system. It's why Tucson is here. It's why Southern Arizona is here. It is home to, here in Tucson, the oldest continuous agriculture in North America is Tucson. The Santa Cruz River, when it would flow historically, before all the groundwater was stripped away, it would flow, hit right around where A Mountain is, Sentinel Peak, right in downtown Tucson, spread out its banks, this nutrient-rich silt and water, and it allowed for it to be a cradle of civilization here. Over time, the Santa Cruz River with Western expansion was exploited, overused, whether people realized it at the time or not. I think folks got out here before we had the advent of the research of hydrology and saw people living here. They saw a flowing river. They saw that it was super hot out. Something's here, something's working. Let's get our ranches, let's get our farms, let's dig as many wells as we possibly can. To the point that around let's say the mid 1850s or so, we used to have mesquite bosques all over this area. Thick, it allowed for jaguar and mountain lion and ocelots and jaguarundi to all live here. But that was right on the same time as the advent of the steam-powered or combustion-powered groundwater well. So we started cutting down these forests to further pull up groundwater, which was used on the surface and a lot of which would have evaporated. So by 1910, putting ourselves in downtown Tucson, the river stopped flowing perennially. Then we just kept going. And with more population moving in here, more deforestation, more use of the groundwater and the surface water, by 1940, the regular seasonal flows that would flow, whether there were monsoons or not, dried up in downtown Tucson. That sort of put us into the modern era of the Santa Cruz River, where the Santa Cruz in downtown Tucson, that riverbed was a dry riverbed, like where you would see a lot of it if you went downtown today. Bringing us up to 2005. In 2005, down around the Nogales reach of the river, this is the stretch of the flowing river that's right down here, about 12 miles or so north of the border. So I got in here before I oriented us all to the map. So Santa Cruz River, it starts in Arizona in the San Rafael Valley. It flows down into Mexico, where the elevation table sort of bends westward and then northward, and the river crosses the border again. Where you're seeing these thick blue lines, that's where we have perennial flows of water in the river right now. And those are flowing because of very high quality wastewater. That effluent is being released into the river at 3 locations, maybe 4, the Nogales International Wastewater Treatment Plant, and the 2 up here in Pima County, Agua Nueva and Tres Rios. So these thick blue stretches of the river, they had been flowing with partially treated, secondary treated wastewater since around the 60s or 70s. And partially treated wastewater, it's sewage, it stinks, it's bad news stuff. But it was the top technology that we had at the time. Back to my diversion here to talk about 2005. In 2005, in this stretch of the river down in Nogales, there was a sudden, almost overnight die-off of cottonwood and willow trees that had been long-standing, centuries old, and it was like a coral bleaching event. So the community reached out. Sonoran Institute was doing research at the time down there, helped, and they asked us to try to figure out what was happening. And what we found was that even though this wastewater treatment plant put lots of water into the river and it was flowing right at the bottom of the roots of the trees, the water had so much nutrient pollution in it because it was only secondary treated wastewater that it had formed like an aqueduct, like a biological slip and slide layer on the surface of, so the water was flowing, but it wasn't percolating down. So these trees that were inches away from the water weren't able to access it, and they had enough and they sort of died off en masse. That research is what started us on our Living River magazines. These are our annual digests that we put out for cataloging the same 15 or so water quality and habitat indicators for the river year after year. They were persuasive enough, and the data and the partnerships to collect those data were comprehensive enough that the federal governments upgraded this Nogales International Wastewater Treatment Plant in 2008, and it came online in 2009 with tertiary treatment. Tertiary treated water, that strips out a lot of that nitrogen, which is an essential nutrient, but too much, it causes those sorts of algal blooms and those biological slicks. That water got clean as soon as they flipped the switch. And we have been tracking the conditions in that stretch of the river ever since. A few years later, Pima County, seeing the great work that was happening down in Rio Rico, invested in today's money about $1 billion to build the Agua Nueva wastewater treatment plant for folks in the area. This is right by the Sweetwater wetlands, right off of Roger Road. And then they upgraded the Tres Rios, the larger wastewater treatment plant, and they came online in 2013. So we're now celebrating up here. We just finished a decade of clean water flowing in the Tucson stretch of the river and about 15 years of clean water flowing in the Nogales stretch of the river to the south. This is a vital corridor, especially as you look down closer to the border, but not solely. You're getting into areas where there's critical jaguar habitat. There are major mountain ranges that the Santa Cruz River flows between, and big cats are known to basically follow the border and go east-west and use the Santa Cruz River as a stopover, as are lots of tropical, subtropical, and native birds. We're having a huge return of mountain lion down closer to the border. An ocelot was just spotted down closer to the border. A jaguar was spotted over in the San Pedro not that long ago, a totally new jaguar. So this river, these river systems down by the border are a critical resource for wildlife. And they're also tremendously used by people, right? I mean, this is a birding hotspot where there's birds, where there's dragonflies, where there's wildlife to be seen, people will go. And it's a major part of the economy throughout the river corridor in Pima County and in Santa Cruz County. So makes sense to protect it, right? That's what sort of got us thinking along the lines of this wildlife refuge. So starting in late 2022, Sonoran Institute was approached by a national NGO called the Wilderness Society. And they had the task of working with Fish and Wildlife Service to identify opportunities, because it was a priority or remains a priority of the Biden administration, to establish wildlife refuges throughout the country. They have an office in Arizona, but they have offices all throughout the country. And their state director said, there's good work happening here in the Santa Cruz River. The justification is on the screen right now. The people that are here use the river, are getting reconnected with it or tightening their existing connections with it because there's clean water flowing in the river again. And these refuges are supposed to, especially the urban refuges, are designed to remedy environmental injustice and to reflect the communities in which they live. Tucson, as have a lot of communities that are along formerly polluted waterways, have redlined a lot of their Black and brown and poorer and older neighbors right against those polluted resources. That's what we see that's borne out in the census data that runs right along the Santa Cruz River, which is where I'm going now. So the Santa Cruz River and southern Arizona is quite diverse. And just within the stretch of the map that we're looking at now, and within only 1 mile of the border, we have 40 EPA or federally identified Justice 40 communities. These are basically communities or census tracts that the federal government has deemed have been subject to, are subject to environmental injustice. And the data are borne out here in the demographics, and there are all sorts of tables that I have around age and income and size of families, generations of families. It's all supporting the fact that this is a community in need and a community that would benefit from federal protection. Looking here in Tucson, along this urban, what we're calling the urban corridor of the river. So this is from its southern extent from Los Reales into the north to around Ina Road or Cortero. It is even more diverse than the already diverse river corridor when you're looking at it at the county level. I mean, this urban corridor of the city of Tucson is quite diverse, and it certainly meets the criteria identified by Fish and Wildlife Service for establishing an urban wildlife refuge. So that's the work that we did going up into like late 2023. At that point, we said, we need to really start talking with the community. This can't just be a Sonoran Institute and Wilderness Society and a few other organizations that have been looped in project. It's got to be a bigger project. So we took this project and expanded it and started getting the word out, socializing the idea of a refuge. And this is the slide that we've sort of built over the course of about 100 different interviews with people that identifies what a Fish and Wildlife Service urban national wildlife refuge is and isn't. So it has to be urban. It's right there in the name, right? So it has to be within 25 miles of a major city that's a population of 250,000 or more. Tucson, check. These things can be co-stewarded. So that means that it would not be an outright, or didn't have to be an outright handing over of the refuge responsibilities to the federal government. They would love to enter into a co-management with Santa Cruz County, with City of Tucson, with the San Javier District, any groups within there. It provides the highest standard for federal protection for land and for wildlife. There's just nothing better. It's eligible for major federal funding. There's about, in the budget, in the proposed budget every year, there's about $900 million for the refuge system. It gets between half and 2/3 of that, but it's a big pot of money to manage these refuges that, if we are able to establish one for the Santa Cruz River here, we would be eligible to access some of that money. And it needs to be a community asset. I feel like this one's the most important one. Like I said, this is not just Sonoran Institute and the Wilderness Society like opening up the door and saying we're doing this urban wildlife refuge. We need to make sure that this is a community that wants this. No community that has been subject to environmental injustice wants to have things done to them in the name of like, we're doing the right thing. Like, you've got to bring these communities on early to make sure that there's buy-in. That's the work we've been doing. I think most important on the right-hand side about what a river, urban national wildlife refuge isn't, is it does not impose regulations or limitations. So we have the Sonoran Desert Multi-Species Protection Plan. We have any number of plans that have been made by the state, counties, and cities. There are plans for the Heritage Reach downtown expansion. There are floodplain projects that are happening up and down the river corridor. What we know is that a refuge doesn't get in the way of any of that. It is a acknowledgement that you live within an urban wildlife refuge. The end. Doesn't impose anything on the community, which is a really important part, especially when we're talking to our municipal partners. And they are intended to maintain access. So a lot of these places that could become the refuge, like locate parks that you would go and visit, they're already functioning in as that job. They are places that are either have great wildlife abundance and diversity, or they are open spaces that people use as a park as it stands now. What we're trying to do is take those existing parcels and get those things acquired by the federal government just to get this whole thing started. So what we're looking at here is the entire refuge system that is managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service, and there are a ton of them. This is the whole, not just urban refuges, but refuges. When we're talking about urban refuges, there are 101 of them throughout the country. The most recently established one was established about 10 years ago. So we are due for a new urban national wildlife refuge. There have been existing urban refuges that have expanded, but brand new ones are a new thing. And that was fortunately it's a neighbor. It's the Valle de Oro refuge that is right along the Rio Grande in Albuquerque. And the Fish and Wildlife Service staff and the community groups who helped establish that have been mentoring us in this process throughout. So it took them about 10 years to get it. We're hoping that our timeline will be a whole lot shorter because they had to do a lot of practical learning along the way. The closest refuge that we have here in Tucson is the Buenos Aires one. That is down, if you go out to Ajo and start to cut south along the Bavaquiveries, that's where the Buenos Aires refuge is, and it's what's the type of quail? Anybody know the type of quail that they're? Gambles? No, it's the other quail, the not Gamble's quail. But they do really impressive work down there, and if you're looking there, if you're looking at Cabeza Prieta, I mean, this is an ecologically rich area for the reasons I discussed before, and just how nice would a long linear urban wildlife refuge look here along the whole Santa Cruz River. So the approach I've talked about so far is an administrative approach. There are two ways that a refuge can get created. The grassroots approach that we've been doing, or you have a political or congressional approach where somebody shoves or gently places an urban wildlife refuge in a bill, done. But for the reasons that I talked about before, this is a community who wants to be involved at the outset in the establishment of anything that is going to affect or benefit them. So we're taking the administrative approach. Administrative approaches let us go totally around Congress. It's a longer route, but it avoids the potentially huge snarling barbed wire that is the US Congress. So we are basically administrative equals grassroots approach. The work we've been doing has been to date, and now we're working with the Fish and Wildlife Service, but it's to hand them on a silver platter all of the reasons why and all of the resources needed to establish an urban national wildlife refuge for the Santa Cruz. They will then take all of that information, digest it, review it, and start taking the steps to establish the refuge. That's the spot that we're at now, fortunately. So the map that's on the screen right now, this is a proposed map. I can't stress that enough. What we have started with is, and I should say around a proposed map, it's up to Fish and Wildlife Service to determine where the refuge boundary is going to be. We, in doing our homework, are trying to be conservative and not make the refuge outline be too big, because it'll potentially come across as an overreach. So what we said is, let's look at a mile on either side of, or half mile on either side of the Santa Cruz River. Let's start there and see what properties are there. So that's what you're seeing sort of in this yellow-orange caterpillar that's going north-south along the river corridor. We'll see where Fish and Wildlife Service goes with this. The most recent conversation that I've had is that they may even be looking at the watershed scale, which would be way bigger than this, and it would be far more inclusive as well. What that outline means is that it's called a acquisition boundary. It's the same thing as the boundary of the refuge. It doesn't mean that all of that land would be owned by the federal government. What it says is if you fall within the outline of the acquisition boundary, the federal government is interested in buying your land if you want to. So you'll see down closer to the border, I shouldn't point because we have Zoom people. You'll see closer to the border, we've got this little bit of a mushroom down here. There's a landowner down in Santa Cruz County who has about 8,000 acres of land that includes 13 linear miles of the Santa Cruz River. They're done farming. Their kids don't want to farm, their grandkids are too young. They want to put it up for urban wildlife refuge. So that is a stretch of the river that is actively in consideration by Fish and Wildlife Service. Everything going north and south, we're keeping this property or this acquisition boundary relatively tight and conservative. You'll also see that we hopscotch over or leapfrog over the San Javier district of the Sonoran Nation. They don't want to give any more land back to the federal government, nor should they. But we have the outright support of the Sonoran Nation's tribal leadership on this project as well. So they have remained steadfast partners on this. They get where we're going and support the work that we're trying to do. Additionally, I'll note that up here in Pima County, the county has offered up on the west branch of the Santa Cruz River, right around here, they've offered up about 570 acres to put forward for the refuge. So it's right around where Mission and Ajo Road junction is, that stretch of the river to the south. So a little bit of a timeline. I know I've sort of been building a timeline, but here's a recent timeline. I talked about this coalition. We established this coalition, or at least had our first kickoff meeting in December of 2023. That was with membership from, the coalition partners, Fish and Wildlife Service, Sonoran Institute, the Wilderness Society. The whole group was there. We also have had site visits from like DC level and regional leadership from Fish and Wildlife Service. They have toured all of the prospective sites that have come forward. So that's the one down in Santa Cruz County, and a few up here in Pima County. In April, the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors unanimously passed a resolution supporting the refuge. Pima County passed a proclamation with a lot of the very same language in there, supporting the refuge. And a fascinating thing about both of those, an important thing about both of those, is that Santa Cruz County didn't say, we want a urban wildlife refuge for Santa Cruz County. What they said is, we want a urban wildlife refuge for Santa Cruz County and for Pima County. Pima County similarly said, we want an urban wildlife refuge for Pima County and for Santa Cruz County. They all see that this is a river system wide effort, not a, we want it for our, not a yes in my backyard, like yes in our backyard. Yombi, doesn't work. Also in May, we submitted a hundreds of pages document called the Landscape Conservation Design, LCD. It's available on the santacruzriver.org website. And it summarizes all the work we've done to date, all the demographics work, all the ecological work, all of the properties that are being considered for the refuge. It's all there. That is the buffet that Fish and Wildlife Service will have to graze over and figure out what they want to cobble together into the urban wildlife refuge. In June, the San Javier District Council unanimously passed a resolution. And just this month, the city of Tucson is going to be voting on a resolution in support of the refuge as well, using a lot of the very same language that was in the Pima County and Santa Cruz County resolution and proclamation. So that gets everybody on board, which is what the Fish and Wildlife Service have been.
Progress.
Great. Oh. So I touched this. What can I do?
You didn't do it.
That's me.
Oh, okay.
Just trying to.
Good. Nope.
Was it not recording?
It was. It was a quick unmute. There we go. We're good. We're good. So then we've got the whole tent. Everybody's accounted for. The keystone part being the city of Tucson, and it's just hard to get. I mean, we're here, but it's hard to get in front of mayor and council and leadership from Pima County to really go over the nuts and bolts of this thing. Now that we have, they like it. They wrote a resolution, a draft resolution, the night that we briefed them on this project. So September 25th is when there'll be a study session with mayor and council on the wildlife refuge. So as we are building more and more support within the city of Tucson, as we have, I should have updated this slide, as we have now succeeded, well, we're not done. I'm not going to count my chickens yet, but we have this resolution that's going to be in front of mayor and council this month. And then what we are really trying to do is leverage as much political pressure as we can and as much resident pressure as we can to put the pressure on Fish and Wildlife Service and say, we all want this. This is politically expedient. This is something that this community unanimously wants. We have not had any pushback on this, which is weird. And it's making me feel a little uneasy, but like we just are getting buy-in, consistent buy-in on this project. And as the city, as we sort of work on the timeline that the federal government has, right? They always say like the federal government's like trying to turn a aircraft carrier, right? Whereas like we want to be like nimble little planes. So what we're doing, acknowledging that this is not going to get done before the election, right? We're not going to have a wildlife refuge established before the election, is to work to establish a memorandum of understanding to create an urban partnership. This urban partnership is a totally separate Fish and Wildlife Service thing within their urban programming, but it would basically keep Fish and Wildlife Service's foot in the door here in the city and here in the region to ensure that federal funding becomes more easily available to the region. Maybe until the refuge is established, we do safe harbor agreements for some of these properties, or we do some other sort of ownership until we're able to go in full on the refuge. So by doing this urban partnership memorandum of understanding, that gets that started. And on September 21st, we are doing a 2-day workshop that everybody here is invited to join. I'm just looking at my phone to check the date. The date was wrong. September 25th is a 2-day workshop that's going to be hosted by Fish and Wildlife Service. The location is almost secure. So once we get that, I'll be sure that Sustainable Tucson gets the word on that. so that if it's something that folks would want to come out and support, it's basically going to be working groups. How are we going to do this? What's the plan? How do we make this thing stay alive if November goes bad? How do we keep this thing on an accelerated pace if November goes good? So that's sort of the working session that we're going to be having in a couple of weeks. This on the screen here, and I think this is even slightly out of date, has more people on it. This is who has joined the Santa Cruz River Refuge Coalition so far. Yeah, look, there's nobody even there under the S's. So let's make sure let's. Well, then I got to update it. Maybe I said that, maybe that's part of the out of date. So I'll take that back right away. But I mean, this is very Tucson and Pima County centric, but not entirely, but it really shows that all of these organizations and people, big and small, get it, want this, and are putting the work in to get this refuge established. And it's just such a exercise in partnership, in optimism, in shared goals. And I just want to keep working on this project all the time, because every push we make results in more and more headway towards establishing the refuge. And I just want to also flag a couple of things. Do you want that? I'll keep it up there for you.
Okay.
You got it? So we have time, and I'm going to happily talk about the refuge, but while we're still fresh, I also want to bring a couple of upcoming events to your awareness. So this month is the month that we release our Pima County City of Tucson Living River magazine. This is our chronicle of the conditions in the river year after year. We used to have Dragonfly Day, which we started in 2019. Dragonfly Day has now this year morphed into Dragonfly Festival because we have a whole month's worth of activities. All month long, there is a bio blitz happening anywhere in the Santa Cruz River, and all this information is on the Sonoran Institute website for this. But you can use your phone and just take pictures of whatever you want to take pictures of, and it helps build a data set of the plants and animals within the Santa Cruz River watershed. On September 18th, we have so that's next Wednesday, we have our Bugs and Bites, formerly Bugs and Brews, event. It's going to be at the playground right in downtown Tucson, right by Hotel Congress, across the street from Hotel Congress. We have 3 speakers who are coming in to the bar, to the restaurant, and they're going to be talking about the venomous creatures of the Sonoran Desert, dragonflies, and then sort of a summary of the Santa Cruz River. Bilingual, family-friendly, free, and you can get food and drink while you're there. It's fun. Then we have 2 virtual presentations, one on September 19th and one on September 24th. Throughout the month, starting in September 23rd, every library, every Pima County library is going to get a dragonfly kit for kids to make dragonflies at home. It will also include our Living River magazine and other information for families around not only this stuff, but other river-related programming that the county, the city, and partners are doing. And then the big one is on September 28th. That is when we do our guided dragonfly tours. We have 4 locations this year with 2 tours, some 3. The Heritage Project in downtown Tucson, Mission Garden, and 2 locations up in Marana with a earlier morning and a later morning tour. Again, all of this is free. You can just hop on and register, and you can get a tour of the Santa Cruz River, see some dragonflies out there with experts who study and research and can speak to these things. It's very, very, very fun. And I just want to encourage us all to keep in touch. The work that Sustainable Tucson does is really instrumental and important, and it matches the work that Sonoran Institute does really nicely, and that this Refuge Coalition does. So please do not hesitate to reach out, keep in touch. We have programming happening all the time. We have a big river cleanup scheduled on October 12th that is going to be up at Grant Road. So we're just going. We're going and going and going, especially now that we're coming out of the summertime. There's a lot of programming. lot of folks sort of coming out and showing their heads after having been in the air conditioning all summer, and it's a perfect time to get back out onto the river and see each other and make a difference in the community. And with that, I think I'm going to say thank you and take any questions. I think I saw there were a few in the chat.
I think the chat was mostly comments,
Okay.
but let's take a look.
Good night, Robin. Here we
Yeah,
go.
it was Robin just saying a couple of comments about meeting you and some of the things that she's been working on.
Oh, good. Yes, happy to meet Robin. All right, good, good, good. All right, well, if folks want to come off mute or questions in the room, let's go for it. I'll repeat it for folks on Zoom in case you don't hear. You good?
Oh, yeah. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand like how the mechanics of creating an urban protected area are gonna lead to like rewatering and return of wildlife.
Yep.
And I appreciate that doesn't and is not slide. But I don't understand how, like, if you can't impose regulation limitation, which I understand, very complicated in an urban setting.
Sure.
If you want people to buy in. But then what's the degree of protection? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question.
How does that work?
So in short, if folks didn't hear it all the way, the question is sort of like, how's the refuge going to actually advance green space and wildlife habitat protection?
Yeah.
Fair?
And water.
So by putting the rare few parcels of land that are near or along the Santa Cruz River into permanent, basically conservation easement, it will prevent those from being developed, from encroaching, especially on older multi-generational families that we have that are right up along the Santa Cruz River. So it has as much of a sort of a societal benefit as it does a wildlife benefit, because those communities, like we see on the west branch of the Santa Cruz River, like we see at the base of a mountain, even like we see at the decommissioned wastewater treatment plant up by Sweetwater Wetlands. Those are all ecological hotspots. They're tiny, but they're really important hotspots. Same thing goes for that big, beautiful parcel that's down in Santa Cruz County. It already looks like a wildlife refuge, but that could get turned into development tomorrow, right? So by putting this rare, ecologically rare, I can't believe that this still isn't developed, land, both of those categories into permanent protection, we're at least stopping the clock, or whatever the metaphor would be, right? And by having a federal presence here, by having the funding that comes with it, restoration of that land and of the floodplains and ideally of the river, when we're talking about Santa Cruz County, would justify further investments in more reclaimed water being captured and or released into the river, more habitat expansion, more holding development at bay, things like that. So it's largely, I don't want to say it's largely passive, but it's preservationist in a major way, right? And everything that follows that becomes active restoration. Is that a good, I feel like that, yeah, okay.
Yeah, just trying to understand, so within that buffer, essentially, there's,
I forgot about, yep, good, no, finish your question.
yeah, that there are actually strict, I mean, you mentioned conservation easement. Obviously, that doesn't happen overnight, but there's a legal process that's
Correct.
initiated.
That's right. So there are two parts of this there's a part of this that bears clarifying. So we have what was the big orange polygon, right? You have the big polygon, that's the acquisition boundary / refuge. Within that are discrete parcels that get purchased that become conservation easements. It's those parcels that become the park part, the refuge part that you would go and visit. But if you fall within that, acquisition boundary, AKA refuge boundary, if you have a big parcel of land or a small parcel of land, and you want to put it towards the refuge, federal government will give you fair market price for that. So it is preserving what's there in the few instances that we have. Pima County's land, that private landowners' land, maybe some other ones that the city of Tucson's going to be able to come up with. And if there are private landowners who are looking to donate and get the tax benefit, that's all there. Exactly. Thank you for helping me clarify that. I forgot about that. Did that cover you? That was it?
I think Paula had a question in the chat.
All right, Paula, here we go.
Okay,
Various resolutions done and moving along. What can individuals do to support the decision and make this happen? Thank you. So here you can go to www.santacruzriver.org. And on this website, you can, right in the front page, you can sign our petition that will go directly to Secretary Holland, Secretary of the Department of Interior, with ties to the Southwest, who is a friend of a lot of the local politicians that we have here in town. And by going to that petition, you can just say, sure, here's my name, here's my address, I like it. You can take the opportunity to put a note in there as well to say just why. That is the best thing you can do. If you are still wanting for action, you can reach out to your city council member here in town or your district supervisor in the county and say the exact same thing. Hey, I just signed this urban wildlife refuge petition. Where are you on this? We have unanimous support from the Board of Supervisors, but they also have phones and they have a much shorter route to get to the Mark Kellys and the Raul Grijalvas and the, whoever it should be to get them to take federal level action to get this refuge established in a shorter time than 10 years. Great question. Thank you.
great. Thank you. That all is really helpful. And among other things, we can put something along those lines in our next newsletter to encourage everyone to do that.
That's right.
Any estimate as to what that balance is?
Sure. So short answer is about 10%. ET goes at poof. And I know this because there is a fascinating little tool that the city of Tucson and Pima County created for themselves called a conservation effluent pool, where they have, I want to say 10,000 acre feet per year of effluent that is making its way through our purple pipes that we have here in town that could be used if they opt to designate it for some sort of conservation purpose. It's conservation effluent. So to date, there are 2 uses. It's been around for decades. Only a couple of years ago did Pima County and the city of Tucson propose, and they are the ones who decide whether to give the projects a thumbs up or not, propose conservation effluent pool allocations. City of Tucson, for the Heritage Reach, the stretch of the river that's, the little bit that's into between Silver Lake and Star Pass downtown, they put in for a 10% conservation effluent pool to recoup, effective paper money, but paper water, to recoup the 10% that would have been lost to evapotranspiration. It's a long walk to get there to come back around and say 10%, but that seems to be the number at least the city is working with.
It's roughly.
I thought I was following you until the last sentence.
That was okay. So around the 10%, is that the question, or around how does the conservation effluent pool work, or what did the city do with the conservation effluent pool?
Well, I thought you were going to say that there's 10,000 acres, you said?
Acre feet per year.
per
Yeah.
year. And so some amount of that got donated to the riverbed, right, by the
Correct.
city and
Yep.
county.
Yep.
Now, what does that have to do with the 10%?
Fair enough. So the city of Tucson the city, when you put any sort of water into big retention ponds, like the kind we have out in Avra Valley, like the Sharp facility, the Southampton active recharge project, these big pools where the water slowly percolates down underground. There are also a few locations along the Santa Cruz River where that water can be put into the river and the city or the county gets credits back for having done that. So I think I can do this shortly now. So if you are, because of state law, if you take a gallon of any sort of water, reclaimed, raw water from the Colorado, and you put that in one of those retention basins, let's say out in Avra Valley, and it percolates down underground, brings the groundwater levels up. For every gallon you put in there, you can pull out a gallon of groundwater to use in the future. So it's a savings facility. Same thing in specific reaches of the Santa Cruz River, including in downtown Tucson. If Tucson Water puts 1 gallon of water into the Santa Cruz River there, for every gallon that percolates underground by crossing a USGS gauge. Am I complicating it? But it's a way for accounting for how much water flows in the river. What the city of Tucson has found is when they put, I'll take the number up, when they put 1,000 gallons of water into the river downtown, 900 gallons cross the line, and they are only getting credit for 900 gallons. So what they're saying is, let's take this conservation effluent pool, 100 gallons in this case, 10%, pretend it goes into the river. So basically it allows the city to get full credit for the water that they put into the river because they are paper money, paper water, adding 10% more. It's not, I don't know if this is a much, I feel like without graphics, I'm not doing a great job on explaining this, but it's water accounting. They're doing water accounting to allow the city to say, we put this much water into the river, we are justified in taking out this much groundwater. Can you help me out, Trace?
Is the evapotranspiration, that 10%, subtracted from the credit the city gets?
Had they not done the conservation effluent pool allocation? Yes. Right, so.
While we're getting credit for recharge for stuff that's evaporated, I'm not sure.
Because I think here's where the city's coming from. The city could just say, like, you know what, then it's not worth us putting water in the river downtown, because 10% of it or whatever, we're losing credit for doing that. Basically, they're using an existing tool that they had created themselves to say, you know what, we've got this water that we're already saving. We're making the effort to save it in the purple pipe, in the reclaim system. Let's just pack it on top, even if it's just for accounting, to make sure that when we put 1,000 gallons of water into the river, later on, we can pull 1,000 gallons of groundwater out for the purposes as designated by this. And, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have brought this one up.
No.
Sorry.
It reminds me of something we're called PTO or paid time off.
Sure.
And so, you know, if I can miss teaching a couple hours this week, if I can put enough PTO, I can just put those 2 hours on my time sheet anyway. It's put in as PTO, but it's not, I didn't do that work, and I'm given a certain percentage credit as the year goes by.
Let's do that.
Is that?
Let's do that. That makes a fair amount of sense, actually. It's saying, yeah, look, you worked this time. It may not all come out exactly as the allocations would imply, but we're going to sort of pad it to make sure that you get your due for the work that you've done. They're doing that with water. Give or take.
And I guess, Luke, we probably shouldn't let this, maybe we should let this go, but I do want to ask one more question.
Yeah, sure.
On that. So the 10% that's not passing the gauge, do they know what's actually, I mean, is some of that infiltrating? Because they really can't measure it until it hits the gauge, right?
So yes, it is, they are attributing it to the and the gauge is not very far downstream either. So it is vegetation within the riverbed, which should be there. It's it's straight up evaporation. It has not been, the total amount has been quantified. The portions within it have not. I'm guessing that they would probably be relying on scientific literature or existing engineering studies to get there, but no, I don't think that they went to that level of review. Call up Tucson Water and say, tell me about this 10%. And see if they can explain it. Not 20 minutes like I just said. I bet they can.